They looked at him the way people look at a mistake. A man in a faded flannel shirt, one hand holding a paddle he hadn't used yet, the other holding the small fingers of a 7-year-old girl with her hair in 2 uneven pigtails, standing in the middle of the most prestigious automobile auction house in Hartford, Connecticut, a room where 3-piece suits and platinum cardholders were the only accepted currency. Nobody said anything out loud. Nobody needed to. A slow glance was enough. A half-second pause in conversation. A slight shift of weight away from him, as if proximity itself were a social risk. The message required no translation. You don't belong here. But Isaac Merrill hadn't come to belong. He had come to take back something that was his, and he had been patient long enough. The Voss and Aldrin auction house occupied a converted warehouse on the south edge of Hartford's financial district. Its exterior, modest enough to be easily missed, its interior designed to make every visitor feel they had walked into a different century. The ceilings ran 30 feet high. Warm amber lighting fell from exposed industrial fixtures that had been retrofitted to hold Edison bulbs, each one casting a glow that made chrome trim and polished enamel look like molten gold. The floors were gray Italian marble, and every footstep on that surface made a sound that announced itself a clean, deliberate percussion that suited the crowd perfectly, because this was a crowd that believed in announcing itself. 17 automobiles were on the day's roster. Each one sat beneath its own spotlight, elevated on a low platform, roped off with velvet cord and accompanied by a placard printed on cardstock, so heavy it could have been mistaken for engraved stone. The combined estimated value of the lots exceeded $4 million. The air smelled of leather conditioning solution, fresh ground espresso from the catering table near the east wall, and the particular variety of cologne that announces a man before he enters a room. Isaac noticed none of that when he walked in. He noticed the placard at the far end of the hall, Lot 14, and below the lot number, in the same elegant serif typeface as everything else in this building, words that had occupied a corner of his mind for 14 years. 1967 Ford Mustang, Shelby GT 500, reserve, $280,000. He stopped walking for just a moment, not long enough for anyone nearby to notice, but long enough for the small girl beside him to look up. Grace Merrill was 7 years old, gap-toothed, and carrying a stuffed rabbit named Pepper that had been repaired with mismatched thread in 4 separate places. She wore a navy dress with white buttons, and her left sneaker was tied with a double knot, while her right was tied in a standard bow because her father had not noticed the discrepancy before they left the house that morning. She was the kind of child who asked questions about everything except the things she could already feel. And she could feel, in the way that children sometimes can, that something about this moment mattered to her father in a way that most moments did not. "Dad," she said, looking where he was looking, "is that it?" Isaac crouched down to her height. "Not yet," he said, "but it will be." She nodded as though this were a reasonable answer, and tucked Pepper more firmly under her arm. The registration desk was staffed by a young man named Jason Whitfield, whose title was Senior Auction Associate and whose gray vest, coordinating pocket square, and gold lapel pin suggested a man who had thought carefully about how he wished to be perceived. He had the practiced pleasantness of someone trained to make every guest feel welcomed while simultaneously conducting a rapid and invisible assessment of their worthiness. Jason looked at Isaac, then at Grace, then at Isaac's flannel shirt, his Casio watch with the black plastic strap, his brown leather shoes that were clean but clearly not new. The assessment lasted less than 2 seconds. "Good morning," Jason said, in the smooth, equidistant tone of a man who has been trained to keep his real thoughts behind his teeth. "Will you be observing today, or are you planning to participate in the auction?" He gave the word observing a weight that made it sound like the more dignified option. Isaac slid the pre-completed registration form across the counter without a word. Jason glanced at the form, at the credit information filled in with unhurried confidence, and reached beneath the counter for a paddle. He extended it with both hands and a thin, professional smile. Paddle 47. It was the kind of smile that said, "By all means, try." Isaac took it, thanked him, and walked with Grace toward the display floor. The crowd at Voss and Aldrin fell into several categories, as crowds at these events always do. There were the serious collectors, quiet men and women in their 50s and 60s who moved through the space the way museum curators move through a gallery slowly, with their hands behind their backs, leaning close to read details on placards that they had already memorized. There were the social buyers, couples in coordinated business casual, whose interest was more in ownership than in automobiles, for whom a vintage car in a renovated garage spoke a language their neighbors would understand. And there were the dominants, the men who arrived already in possession of the room, or at least believing they were. Dominic Hale fell firmly into this last category. He was 45, built like a man who played competitive tennis on weekends and reminded people of it, wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit over a white shirt open at the collar, a matte black Audemars Piguet on his left wrist. Dominic had developed 3 commercial real estate properties in the greater Hartford area in the last 4 years, 2 of which had been profiled in regional business publications. He moved through the auction floor with the particular ease of a man who had never, not once in recent memory, entered a room where he was not the most immediately impressive person present. He noticed Isaac. He could not help noticing Isaac, because Isaac was the sort of anomaly that catches the eye precisely because it does not fit. He said nothing directly. He simply turned to the man standing beside him, his attorney, a thin man named Warren, who laughed at everything Dominic said and let one corner of his mouth lift slightly. "I didn't know this was open registration," Dominic said. Warren made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Isaac was standing near lot 14 when this was said. He did not look over. He was crouched slightly, his attention directed at the undercarriage of the Shelby, studying something near the rear axle, with the specific focus of a man who knows exactly what he is looking for. His right hand moved to the outer edge of the rear wheel well, 2 fingers tracing the seam of the metal with the gentleness of someone reading Braille. Jason materialized beside him within seconds. "Sir," Jason said, with the same calibrated pleasantness he had deployed at the desk, "we ask that guests refrain from touching the display vehicles." Isaac straightened. "I apologize," he said evenly. "I was checking the original body seam. This is an authenticated 1967 Shelby GT 500, Jason said. Slower now, as if reducing the complexity of the sentence for someone who might not immediately follow. "I think you can be confident the documentation is thorough." Dominic, nearby with his champagne glass, addressed no one in particular at a volume designed to carry. "Do they not have an invitation requirement this season?" He shook his head with the expression of a man who supports standards in principle. "It's a shame when these things get diluted." The thin sound of agreement moved through the cluster of people near him like a small, ugly wave. Grace stood very still beside her father. She did not understand every word, but she understood the sound of them, the particular tone adults used when they wanted to make a person feel small, without the inconvenience of saying something they could be directly blamed for. She had heard it once or twice before, in other rooms, directed at her father, and she did not like it. She pressed closer to his arm. Isaac put his hand on her shoulder, not to pull her away, not to shield her, simply to let her know where he was. "They don't know us," he said quietly. "Low enough for only her. It's fine." She looked up at him. His face was calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from not caring, but the kind that comes from caring about exactly the right things and nothing else. The main auction room held 120 padded chairs, arranged in curved rows before a raised dais, where Barrett Sloan, the house's senior auctioneer, would conduct proceedings with the smooth authority of a man who had been selling significant things to wealthy people for 22 years. The walls displayed framed archival photographs of notable lots from the house's history. The sound system was tuned to a frequency that made every voice in the room sound more important than it might have been otherwise. Isaac chose 2 seats in the back row, which had the practical advantage of giving him a clear view of the entire room. Grace settled beside him, pulled a small, worn notebook from the pocket of her dress, and began drawing. She was working on a series of illustrated pages about Pepper the Rabbit and his various adventures, a project she had been adding to for several months. She drew with the same focused concentration her father brought to his own work, and she asked no questions once she was settled. The early lots moved efficiently. Barrett's voice rolled through the room like slow water, unhurried and authoritative, placing context around each vehicle before the bidding opened. Isaac watched with the attentiveness of a man attending a performance he has seen before, but in which he is nonetheless interested in the craft.